Hello, everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I am AC Brown, your psychic, channel, and spiritual guide, and this is another episode of Is My Aura on Straight? In this episode, you will see that I talked to author Rachel Lang, who is an astrologer. She does astrocartography. She's also a medium, but she has a new book out called Modern Day Magic. And I got an advance copy of the book. And this episode is talking about the book and the different things in the book and how she kind of came about writing this book. It did take her a while. And we have a really candid conversation about certain things in the book. I suggest you get the book. I'll put the link in the show notes below. But I hope you enjoyed this episode with Rachel Lang with her new book, Modern Day Magic. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Is My Aura on Straight? I am your host, AC Brown. I am your psychic channel and spiritual guide, and I want to thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Is My Aura on Straight. Today, I have a special guest who is a projector, and I'm so excited to talk to her. I have Rachel Lang, who is an astrologer. She's based in Los Angeles. She's also a psychic medium and a writer and the author of the new amazing book, Modern Day Magic, 8 Simple Rules, Realize Your Power and Shape Your Life. Welcome to Is My Aura on Straight, Rachel.
Thanks so much, AC. I'm so glad to be here.
Well, thank you so much for being on this podcast. So I just want to dive in and talk a little bit about the book. First of all, I am huge. As we talked before this, aesthetics are like my thing. All of my Libra placements. Yes. I am obsessed with the design of the book. I was just like, that just gets me so excited. How was just talking about the book before we get into the nitty gritty? How was that design process with working with your publisher? Do they include you? Do they give you like mood boards? How does that work?
Yeah, they did. But I have to say, my publisher is awesome. They had gave me 2 different options. They gave me mood boards to start out with, and then they gave me 2 different options of design templates. And both of them were stunning. They just have an eye for design. So Kate Burkett is my main contact at Hardy Grant, who's my publisher. And it was her vision, and the illustrator Cody Bond and the designer Claire Warner. They really took the words and brought them all to life.
They knocked it out the park. The color scheme, the typography. I was like, just the aesthetics alone, and was just like, oh my gosh, I have to read this. It looks good. So besides that, they did a good job on that. So is this your first book, official, like first published book?
It's my first published book. I had a self-published book back in the 2002, that I did in conjunction with a group of, I worked with formerly incarcerated women for a little while. And so I self-published a book that chronicled the lives of them and their process of coming out of prison. But that was self-published. So this is my first published book.
Well, so technically your second. Self-publishing is still publishing.
Yes.
So don't discredit it. That's amazing. So how did the transition, because since we know that you're a projector, so everyone listening knows about their human design aura type, especially their astrology basics, sun, moon, and rising. Mm-hmm. Now you were in a different field while you were probably doing your astrology and your psychic mediumship. I'm sure you were having main jobs and side hustling. So tell me about the transition into full-time work of doing your spiritual business.
It's such a great question. So I came out of college thinking that I was going to be a documentary filmmaker and a writer, and got really involved. I was working in the film industry, and then 9/11 happened and everything shut down, and where I was living in the Midwest. And then all the while I had been into astrology, I'd been into psychic mediumship. I was taking classes, development classes at a spiritualist church. So this was always something I was developing, but it really wasn't a recognized career. Like I couldn't see how I could make money doing this. And so I worked for a nonprofit, and then I got involved in marketing and just kind of pieced together some things until 2004, when I thought, okay, I could really do this as a career. And so I worked towards certification, astrological certification, and then I saw my first client in 2006.
Oh, that's awesome. What was
Yeah.
that like? Take me to like what you were feeling after you helped them. What, if you can remember, what did they come to you for?
Well, it was a dear friend of mine who actually, Marianne Russell, she's a soul reader and she's based in Maine. And we were both living in Nashville. And I was taking an intuition group with her, and she said, you need to be doing this professionally. And at the time I thought there's no way, but she came to me for a reading. And it was amazing. I mean, I think the first time you do something that aligns with your soul, whatever it is, there's magic that happens. And so we had this incredible synergy. And then she really just mentored me. She found me an office with her group, and she brought me into their practice. And then, it was still a side hustle. I was still having to work a day job and build up my practice. But, I started my practice with 3 free readings. And each one of those 3 people recommended me to 3 more of their friends. And my practice just built out of that. And it's, it was tough building it up to that, to the point where it was full-time work. But this is a case for astrocartography, because if you live somewhere where your 7th house is really featured, then a client practice. So I moved to LA, which put my natal sun in my relocated 7th house, right on the descendant. And that was it. Like, I never looked back. My client practice grew so fast, I didn't have time for anything else.
That's interesting, because I'm struggling right now with location, because so my Jupiter line goes directly through Atlanta, Georgia. And then my Venus is on the West Coast. It's near Arizona, but I would never move there.
Mm-hmm.
But LA is also, a place. And so I am thinking of venturing to my Jupiter line. Because, and everybody's like, that's good. That's going to be amazing. So that's interesting that you say that.
Well, and if your natal Jupiter is in Libra, then
yes,
that would facilitate client practice. That would, because Libra is it's like the one-on-one client relationship. So, but where I didn't know this at the time, but when I moved to Nashville, Nashville has my Jupiter line going right through it. Jupiter moon going right on the ascendant, and the doors open for you. It can be really easy, like relatively speaking, because your Saturn's also right there. Yours is personally.
Right. My Saturn is right. It's like, it's not, it's the way it shows up. It's not in Georgia. It's like a little like over, it's like on the, whatever's next to Georgia on the map. That's where it is. It's like a little bit further, but the Jupiter is like right down through Atlanta. Okay. Right down, like literally in the not the outskirts, like within the perimeter when you're looking at a map. So it's very interesting.
Well, and sometimes with astrocartography, you meet someone who changes your life, who becomes Jupiter. You meet someone from Atlanta or from wherever your Jupiter line is. So someone could be listening to this and open the door for you.
Well, let's see what happens. I'm in a 9 personal year, so we'll figure it out. Wow. So it's a whole mess over here. Feels like some days. So that's good to know that you brought up astrocartography. So here's my thing with astrocartography, because of course we don't want to always pick up and go. So when you can't do that, and I try to tell people, like you just said, maybe it's someone you know, or maybe you visit a place sometimes, but what, in your opinion, what do you think are the most preferable lines for, you know, feeling good and forward momentum? Which planetary lines do you feel are like the best?
Yeah, I with astrocartography, I look at the natal chart. And so sometimes, like you would, you might think Jupiter, you might think Mars, actually no astrologer would say move to your Mars line.
Yeah, I'm about to say what?
Unless you have a really strong Mars, which I do. But I like to look at the quality of the planets. So do you have a planet that's exalted, meaning it's in its own sign, or it's in an exalted sign? In dignified,
my moon? Yeah, my moon is in Taurus.
Oh, then yeah, then your moon, moving to where your moon line is prominent, would bring out some of the best qualities of your chart.
And I don't know where that is. I think it's like somewhere overseas, probably. I have to look again.
But Jupiter's safe, unless you have if you have Jupiter conjunct Pluto, then, or opposite Saturn or something like that, then you're always going to be going back and forth between having an opportunity followed by, something that you're having to let go, or some kind of uphill climb. So I like to look at what planet do you want to bring out? And if it's your, obviously the benefics, Venus and Jupiter are good.
Right.
But if your sun is really strong, if you've got a Leo sun or an Aries sun, then you might want to go somewhere where your sun line is prominent. So it just depends on your natal chart and some of those aspects.
Well, thank you for that. Cause I have, sometimes clients ask, and I'm, right now in my life, I'm like, nope, Jupiter, I need to be there.
Yeah.
Because I've lived in, I live in the DC area, have nothing. There's nothing here, no lines, nothing. It's just completely empty.
Oh, wow.
It's like, okay. And I feel like that, like, it's just, kind of see what happens kind of energy. And I don't want that anymore. So thank you for that, and those listening. So now let's kind of jump into the book. So you have 8 simple rules. I love your rules. Rule number 1, trust yourself. Rule number 2, magic is power. Rule number 3, attention is power. Rule number 4, embrace your dark side. Rule number 5, be whole. Rule number 6, relax and allow. Rule number 7, ritualize it. And rule number 8, use magical astrology. Now, before we get into some of the rules that kind of I was reading, I was like, no, we have to talk about this. I love your definition. And I just want you to go a little bit deeper into this, because it is in the book about fear versus intuition. Many clients ask me that all the time, but I love how you wrote it and explained it. Can you go a little bit into that?
Thank you. Yeah, it is such a question. And when I teach psychic mediumship, so many of my students have asked me this. And the way I like to say is that, fear is that loud voice inside of us that wants to try to tell a story. So a lot of times what happens, and people who are starting to develop their spiritual awareness will get an intuition about something. Like, I don't completely trust my partner is one that I hear often, or like something's going on. And very often that intuition is saying, yeah, something's going on, but our mind wants to take the story, create a storyline around it. And often that storyline's pretty dramatic.
Very dramatic.
Yeah. They're cheating on me, and so, but intuition never really amplifies that loud voice in our heads. It's always anchored in the body. And usually, it does the purpose of it is to protect us. And so it often does motivate us to take action, but it isn't that mental chatter. And so whenever we get into that fear place, going back into the body, grounding ourselves in the body, really centering in the awareness of what am I feeling, the intuition doesn't always give us a storyline. for, oh, this is exactly what's going on. But it tells us, hey, let's watch out, or hey, this is something that's coming down the road. And so if we can sit in that awareness, often the answers just rise up from the deep part of ourselves.
Yeah, I love that. That was such a great explanation. So for those listening, that's how you can tell the difference, because people always ask me, or just like, how do you know the difference? I'm like, you're always going to feel intuition in your body. That's why it's so important for you to be grounded within your body, and or to find, what I like to say, finding home in your body and finding what that means for you. Because when you find home in your body, anything that's off, your intuition is going to tell you. It's never going to steer you wrong. So, and I like that, fear is like creating this massive storyline that's like crazy, catastrophic, and like, the worst of the worst. So I really love that. So in the book, you have these rules, which are amazing. And now that I know that you're a projector, I will, the rule that kind of stood out to me is number 6, and we'll probably jump around, but rule number 6 is relax and allow. So since you know that you're a projector now, and when you talk about magic and the rules and finding your power and all of that stuff, and then relaxing and allowing, knowing that for you, many of the things that you manifest are going to be invitations or recognitions outside of yourself. How do you relax and allow? How do you relax and allow? And this is for all aura types or anybody listening, but mostly for projectors. How do you relax and allow?
Are you asking for a friend? No.
Yeah, for me. I'm asking for me. Me.
This was the hardest chapter to write. I mean, I would sit down and then I would get super distracted by something. And it took me so long to get this because relaxation is really hard for me. I have a Gemini moon, and I have Jupiter conjunct my moon. It's like, there's no relaxation that's happening. I have a Taurus rising, so nobody can see it, but there's no relaxation happening behind the surface. So I actually developed, and when I was writing this book, I wrote it over the course of several years of actually just doing a deep dive into magic. And so through that process, I came up with some exercises for how to do that. I mean, I think for me, a lot of times I relax by exerting energy. So like either dancing or running, like running for 5 minutes, drumming, definitely meditation is a way to relax. But I think when I was first, and I don't know if I can't remember if I put this in the book or not, but when I was first learning about manifestation back in the 90s, when I started my spiritual development training, I developed this exercise, which is the God shelf or the goddess shelf, where I would imagine that there's this closet and the shelf that was out of like a little bit beyond reach.
Okay.
And anytime I had something that I was obsessing about, and often it was, something I was trying to manifest or something that was struggling for me, I would do this visualization where I would put whatever it was into a box up on the shelf. And anytime I would try to think, anytime it would come into my awareness, I would go right back into that vision of like taking it down from the box, looking at it, putting it back up, so that I was drawing awareness to the way that my thoughts wanted to go to those things that weren't productive. And so over time, it allows you, I was able to separate from whatever it was my mind couldn't stop thinking about, and develop a sense of trust in the divine, trust in the forces of magic, trust in my own self, that things could flow to me.
I love that. That's a good way of putting it, because in your book, you explain, just how you have to have those, there has to be some trust. In of course, your first rule is trust yourself, which is really hard for everyone to do. And I think that what happens is that It's not that you don't trust yourself. It's that you're not honest with what you want.
Oh,
And
yes. Yeah.
that's where people kind of like, that's where that's why you're not manifesting, or that's why magic is not working, because you're not honest with yourself. So with the trust, you have to say, this is actually what I want, and I trust myself that I can get it. And so when we talk about your first rule, trust yourself, why do you think that when it comes to magical practice, spiritual practices, why do you think people don't trust themselves?
Well, two things. So I love what you just said about sometimes we don't know what we want, because we have all this cultural conditioning that tells us what we're supposed to want. And very often, I mean, that's capitalist thinking, so I think that's one thing. But I think we don't trust ourselves because, the unconscious part of us, so the higher self, the subconscious self, the divine self, which I talk about in relation to the part of us that is the oneness, that is connected to the whole, these make up the bulk of who we are. So the ego and the conscious self is only about 25% of the picture. So that 25% of the picture might want, to move into a new house or to relocate. But the higher self might have a plan for, oh, no, you're supposed to meet this person here first. Or the divine self, a lot of times this happens when I work with women who are trying to conceive, or men who are trying to start families. Sometimes that little baby spirit will come to me and say, my future spouse isn't ready yet. Or I feel like I just got goosebumps all over. So I feel like that might be a message for one of your listeners. Like I just got goosebumps
or
all
me.
over.
As I'm super single, that's probably for me.
Oh my gosh. Okay, then yes, I just got goosebumps.
My future, that's the message. My future spouse is not ready for me yet.
Yep.
Sounds about right, because I'm wondering what the hell is going on.
Yeah, and this happens a lot of times when we're trying to manifest love, or we're trying to manifest a baby, or we're trying to do that kind of magic, is that it's not time. And so I think, people give up and they say, oh, well, I'm going to be single the rest. Like, this doesn't really work. Manifestation, the universe isn't kind and good. But what I did, because I went through that too, where, for years, like, I think it was like 4 years where I was single. And finally, I started doing this exercise where I would just connect to my future. I would bring in all of my heartstrings. I would connect to the energy, the heart energy of my future spouse. And I would feel the presence. And then I would write love notes as if she were just like on vacation, as if we were just apart from one another. And what's wild is that I gave her I wrote it in a little notebook, a whole year of love notes. And I gave her, yeah.
I've actually envisioned that, doing it for like my husband, giving him my journal on our wedding day, like, here, all of this stuff, but he's not ready yet. That's what you just said. So
maybe you should move to where your Venus line is.
Oh gosh.
I'm joking. No, I think it's gonna happen. Just talk to his higher self. Say, hey, let's go.
Right, let's go. Get ready. Come on. What's the problem now? Once I move, it'll all fall into place. So because you do have a diagram in the book, which I loved, explaining your higher self, all of the in the body, which I love. One thing that stood out to me, because since I'm single and I'm on the dating journey, I came across, as my therapist said, a baby spiritualist, and he had the nerve or the audacity to say that emotions are negative. And I was just like, that's not how it works, but you're new to this, but it's fine. And so in your rule number 4, which is embrace your dark side, you talk about the shadow work and doing all of that. In your kind of viewpoint in the work that you've been doing all of these years, why do you feel that people are so afraid to go there in order to, not afraid to, but why do you think people avoid it when in fact it's the only way through to the good stuff?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I think people are inherently afraid of their own power. And the more I think for women in particular, or for non-binary people who've struggled to really, struggled in this patriarchal culture, I think that that fear of power is amplified. And the darkness, those deep emotions that you're talking about, the grief, the loss, the pain, the sorrow, the depression, all of those things, there's a lot of power in them. And it's not like we want to get stuck in those places, because there's also so much power in joy and bliss and love. And I mean, those high, what we might consider more high vibration frequencies. But for centuries, the people who have been allowed, quote unquote, to have anger, or to have those dark thoughts, or to have power, has been a very select few. It's been this dominant class, and mostly white men. And so now we're at a time, and magic is a part of this, where so many of us are waking up to our own power and seeing that our power is in the body. It is in this sacred feminine spirituality. Well, I say the word feminine, not in terms of a binary, but in terms of that deeply feeling realm, that yin, that dark, that hidden aspect of ourselves. And when we awaken to the power that is within those things, then wow, what we can't do. And then when we gather together and in ceremony with one another, and we're all, operating from the depth and the core of who we are, then wow, we can change the world. And we're seeing that happen right now.
And it's going to get better and better and better.
Yeah. For sure.
So when we talk about power, when you talk about it, and, step 3, before that is attention is power. What do you mean by that, especially before like going into your next rule of embracing your shadow side? What does that mean? The attention is power. Because I mean, I've read the book. I don't want to give it away, but what is that for the listeners who are going to read the book and all of that? When you say attention is power, explain that.
Mm-hmm. With magical processes, the more we focus our energy and our attention on an intention, the more powerful we are directing light, we are directing magic, we are directing energy to that intention. And we get distracted, not just by our phones and electronic devices and social media, but our thoughts distract us. Those hidden things that we're not paying attention to distract us. And so when we work on our shadows, when we embrace those aspects of ourself that we're afraid to see, then we remove resistance. Because if we don't fear any aspect of ourself, then it doesn't have power within us or over us. And I think so many times we fear the potential that we have to hurt other people. And especially for those of us who are good people, we fear our potentiality, our potential to rise out of the conditions that our family is in. We fear losing relationships. We fear, using our power for good, or for the potential that we have to do harm. And so when we remove fear, then we have more access to our resource and our magic, which is the creative power within us.
I love that. And it's so interesting that you say that, when we remove fear, because, I truly believe that we are powerful, all of us. But do you have any thoughts around, because I'm sure the clients that you work with, that the fear that we have of being great and being powerful, why is that such a problem, especially with women? It's like, we don't want to like step into that, like, I'm the shit kind of, person. Like, we just want to, kind of like, no, it's okay. This is good enough. Why do you think that happens? Especially because I think that goes hand in hand with magic. So
I think it's because for not too many centuries ago, we were burned at the stake for this stuff, or we were beaten, or we were tortured, or, any number of acts of violence. There's a relationship between the fear of power and the history of oppression, but also the history of using physical force to dominate others. And so I think, and I actually did some of my research for this in my master's, when I pursued my master's in theology in 2014. I did research on the witch trials of the early modern period. And I saw a relationship there between, and so I know the kinds of torture that happened, and I don't want to trigger anybody by talking about the specifics. But to think of that kind of torture happening, and then we saw it again, the same rhetoric that was being used against witches was being used against Africans in the time of slavery, all through colonization against the indigenous people. And it wasn't really until 1978 the Native Americans had full legal rights to engage in religious ceremony. So this isn't too much this is the recent past.
Right. That's only like 42 years, right? Not a long time ago.
No, but we also see it now. We see it in social media. So there are lots of ways that, how many of us who do this work have trolls who, internet trolls.
Oh my God.
Don't
even.
Yeah. I mean, I've had so many people on my Instagram, and I don't even have, that big of a following, telling me I was going to burn, that I've, like saying really damage, like really dark things. And so the dominant culture systematically tries to strip us of the only power that they cannot control, because it's inherent and it's within us. And so it's why we fear it. But now the more we gather in community, this is why community is so important. The more we gather in community, the more we support one another, and especially women supporting one another doing this work, the more we break that cycle.
Thank you for that. I mean, that's so true. And when we talk about all of those things, what I really, chapter 7 kind of stuck out to me. I come from a Catholic family, so you do too. And you were like, I'm like, that's all. People are like, you and your rituals. I'm like, that's all I know. Sorry, like that's it. That's literally all I know is burning candles and praying. Like that's like my whole childhood. Of my grandma, we're going to church and my grandmother going to light candles, or we're doing it at home. Like that's it. That's all I know. So when you talk about, and I always tell my clients how important spiritual rituals are, and it doesn't have to be like this grandiose thing, but you have a whole chapter on ritualize it. What do you think listeners can do, or what are the basics of creating your own personal ritual? Something simple. What is something simple that they can do without, because sometimes my rituals are very extensive, but that's because I've been doing them my whole life. So it's a little bit different.
Yeah, no, same here. I'm one of my teachers used to say the smells and the bells of the Catholic Church, Catholic faith. So everything in your life can be a ritual. And I talk about how, when I make dinner, sometimes when I'm making a special dinner, obviously if I'm just like, cooking a veggie burger for myself, it's different. But, I have a special pot that I cook in, and I call it my cauldron. And I have a spoon that I call my magic wand, and it's hand carved, all, sustainable materials, reclaimed wood, all those things. And so everything that I put into the food has some kind of alchemical or magical property. So this is, and then I'm putting intention in it. So anything in your life can be a ritual. You know, my morning shower is often a clearing ritual. As I'm getting ready for bed, I am, doing a gratitude practice to just bring myself into a different state of awareness as I'm falling asleep. So we can have these everyday rituals, or we can have the more ceremonial rituals where you would put, crystals out at the full moon for clearing, or make moon water, or things like that.
I love that. I love that. I love that. So you wrote the book. It's amazing. What do you want readers to take away?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the whole thing, I've summarized it in the last few, in the chapter where one of the last chapters, where I say that, that our crisis, that the times in our life when we feel the emptiest, when we feel the darkest, that those are often really creative, fertile times. And from that, you're in a magical process. And from that, there is something that you're creating. And I think the core message of the book is that you're more powerful than you know. And that magic is a type of power that's accessible to anyone. And the more we tap into that power, reclaim it, work with it, and share it, the more we can change the world and co-create a world that the kind of world that we want.
I love that. That's so amazing. So what's your favorite chapter? Or you don't have a favorite, what was your favorite chapter to write?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I'll say too that, so much of the book started with my own fertility journey of, trying to bring a child into our family. And we did bring my daughter was born 2-3 days after I wrote the last words of the book, after I wrote the end, and then she didn't survive.
Oh no.
Yeah. So then I went into an editing process, those 3, like, cause I had a book deadline, and the whole process of having her and losing her was part of my magical journey. And so my favorite chapter is actually Embracing Your Dark Side, which I wrote. I wrote the first draft, and then after she passed, I went into it and rewrote so much of it, having had learned the power of grief and the power of loss, and how those emotions and experiences are transformative. And so I learned so much more about magic than I ever imagined that I would. And so that's really my favorite chapter, because I wrote it with so much depth.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
Just piggybacking kind of off of that, do you think that dark side, and I think we touched on this a little bit earlier, that dark side made you more powerful?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. What happens when you go through grief, or when you go through loss or trauma, is you have two choices. And one is you can close up and become bitter. And it's easy to do that because
very easy.
It doesn't feel fair, and you hate everybody, and you just want to, you have these, so that could happen. Or grief, when we have those intense emotions, it moves us into a new state of awareness where the ego can't function. And so often we are our most magical in those really dark times. And when we keep centering ourselves into our hearts, keep feeling, like you talked about, feeling the feelings that are coming up, then those feelings are like cleansing water that is washing away fear. That's what it's in inspiring us with courage. and helping us it's freeing us actually from something that we have allowed us to that has been a limiting force in our lives. And for me, what it did was it gave me the courage to be more visible in my work. It really inspired a passion for what I do. And, now I feel my little baby with me every single time I speak or talk about the book or do my work. And so it's, so those dark times are when we're tilling the soil to plant something new. And I think it's important that we just keep centering in our hearts during those times, because that is actually when we're more powerful, not when we're manifesting the life of our dreams.
Wow. That was beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for that. I love that. So what's next for you? Do you have the book out? You're getting it out and about. What would you want to happen? Not just with the book, but the next steps for you career-wise.
Yeah, well, I've actually, so the next step, so I'm teaching a number of classes, and I'm teaching some magic classes, and I've started writing a whole line of children's books that people will be finding out more about. So there are some new developments that are happening there. And I'm also leading more rituals and leading art rituals and different activations and going into groups. I'm going to be working with a couple of nonprofits to bring healing art into those circles. So there's a lot that's happening. Like I said, it's been a very fertile time where a lot of seeds are planted.
That's awesome. So where can everyone find you on social media, your website, all of that? Give them the deets.
All right. So my website is Rachel Lang Astrologer. On Instagram, I'm at Rachel Lang Astrologer. I'm on Facebook, but I don't know if anybody does Facebook.
I don't think so. Don't worry about that. Instagram and your website is fine.
Yep. And I'm just starting Twitter. I've been like so avoidant of Twitter.
Is so weird. It's just you got to get in and try it and then see if it works and then get out.
Yep. And TikTok. I'm on TikTok now too.
Oh, awesome. Well, that's great. Well, thank you so much for being here on Is My Aura on Straight. Make sure you all click the link in the show notes for Rachel's book, Modern Day Magic, 8 Simple Rules. Realize your power and shape your life. It's a phenomenal book and it's beautiful. So if you don't want to read it, just look at it and put it on your shelf, honestly. They did a phenomenal job with that. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks so much.